start by giving your background a little bit, because you've got a particularly interesting background in what you did. You're the founder of Instagram, then you went to Anthropic. So talk to us about all that.
Yeah, maybe the through line, I've always been interested in the combination of what's possible with software and computing, and then how do you actually make that real for people. And so when in Stanford, I studied symbolic systems, which is this very odd degree, although it's gotten more popular like in the years since, which was this combination between cognitive science, design, computer science, philosophy, psychology, and AI. And AI at the time was still like mostly finding paths through mazes, not what we call AI today. But I love that kind of intersection of, you can have the world's most powerful software, but if it's not comprehensible to people, have you actually succeeded in doing anything real? And kind of carrying forward in that, I first worked at a company called Meebo, which was actually great training because the company culture and the recruiting and the hiring was so strong there. And from that, co-founded Instagram. And Instagram, a lot of what we were focused on, you have to like rewind it all, it was like 2009, mobile apps were still emerging. Cameras were starting to become more ubiquitous, but most people still felt like their photos were kind of stuck on their devices. A lot of what we were trying to do is like on every screen, is it very clear what is the one thing that we want you to do? Is it like stupidly easy to figure out how to create a graph, to become good at Instagram, and still be able to progress in that as well. And then did another startup with the same co-founder as Instagram called Artifact. This is the beginning of AI. So it's AI-powered news recommendations. I still get probably at every event, there's one person that comes up to me that's like, man, I loved Artifact. Why'd you shut it down? We did it for about 3 years and realized it was not on the trajectory to be kind of the kind of place we wanted to spend the next 3 years. So we ended up selling it to Yahoo. It lives on as Yahoo News. And then I had this intersection moment where, do I go start another company? I love founding things. I love 0 to 1. Or do I go join somewhere? And my previous 3 years at Artifact had showed me two things. One is coding was about to change. So I had started using like early coding models to accelerate my own work at Artifact. It was so early still though. I would draw, these models didn't have vision yet. So I would draw ASCII art of the screens I wanted to implement and say, hey, ASCII art, like, dots and dashes, and say, great, please implement this in Swift. I'd hit enter, and it was 2 tokens per second. I'd go make a coffee, maybe take a walk. And when I got back, it was like a start of what was actually going to be good. But you can see, the trajectory was already there. So number one, coding was going to change. And number two, the models were going to provide this intelligence layer that were going to take months of development time of a feature down to potentially hours. So for us, some of the intelligence that we baked into Artifact were things like take a article and summarize it, take a headline that's written to be super clickbaity, and then rewrite it to be factual. These are features that if we had to spin up a research team would have taken us months to do well. But this is 2020, 2021, an API call away even for those initial versions. So it was really clear to me that the next generation of software was going to be built and powered by these labs. And I, talked to the folks at Anthropic. They shared that vision. Also just loved the culture there. We can talk more about that as well. But it felt like that was going to be the real springboard, and I wanted to be a part of that.
I think what Anthropic's doing is actually not only amazing, but also it was crazy unlikely when you folks started, and what you've accomplished is no small feat. But before we go there, any thoughts on like a widely held belief in tech that you think is fundamentally wrong?
There's this belief that design is going to go away right now, and it's, you can prompt the models, they'll create software.
Dylan was here earlier, by the way.
What's that? Dylan was here, yeah. So Dylan, I guess we both share this contrarian belief. To me, there is still the difference between software you use and software you love. And I think that gap of, I actually come back to this, I'm choosing this, I've changed my behavior because of this, I've gone off and told a bunch of other people about it. I've yet to see that with a lot of sort of, off the cuff, vibe-coded stuff. I think there's still that need for what's the craft, what's the reason, why does this exist, what's the brand, right? Why does it all mean, to a person? So that's one where I feel like the demise of thoughtful designed software is overstated. Now, the actual role and how you get there will absolutely have to evolve, but I still think that there's a need. I see it internally. We could talk about my transition to working on labs now. I spend so much time talking to designers now, and their role has definitely shifted, but it's, I think, as essential as ever.
And so if you were to think of the big mistake that product folks are making, because right now what's happening in the labs is there's been this huge investment that's happened in research. Research is such a foundational element of building out the models. But the companies that are doing well are the ones that also have exhibited very strong product sensibilities. Any kind of thoughts on what mistakes are product folks making in this next wave because they've actually tried to port too much of the previous wave to the next wave? And what are the things that we should be reframing for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think one really significant one is staying too much in sort of mock-up or sort of, faked prototype land before you actually get something real that you can actually then get a sense of the model capabilities. A lot of what we do is try to build products that don't work yet and then wait until the next model release and see, well, does the product work now? Like we built computer use, so Claude driving your computer and clicking as a prototype in my 3rd month at Anthropic. So this was 2024 still, wow. And it was terrible. Like it was, it was clicking all over the place. Like it was, it just didn't work. But even that prototype taught us, all right, where are the model capabilities? And every time the research team had another research model, we'd throw it in there and be like, well, it got past the file menu, now it got to the open menu. It got a little bit further. And then there was this moment, I think it was Sonnet 3.7, where we threw it in there. And actually, we didn't expect it to have improved that much. So we kind of did it in kind of as a good practice. And I suddenly got a ping from one of the researchers. They're like, look, it actually got good. We can actually productize this now. But we wouldn't have known it if we didn't have that harness throughout. So I think you just need to reframe your sort of purpose as a product person from being, I deliver a beautiful product requirements doc, I deliver beautiful wireframes with my designer, and it gets handed off to engineering, to software is now a living, breathing system with this non-deterministic, wonderful, but also infuriating sometimes engine at its core. You need to get to that sort of moment where you're experiencing that as quickly as possible.
Even in the enterprise?
Especially in the enterprise, yeah.
And so, all right, so let's talk about, because you and Dario and everyone has been pretty vocal at Anthropic about this notion of safety and security and how you need to actually not just have agents run loose in the Wild West, but do you feel like more autonomy is better, or you will get better adoption rates if you can control the autonomy a little bit of agents?
I think that one of the things that's magical about what these models can do now is, given the objective and fairly high-level instructions, find their way there. And sometimes it's kind of endearing. Somebody just sent, one of our engineers sent me, he had asked Claude to prepare a sort of a vacation preparation doc for his family, but Claude had hit a block loading the website of the vacation rental. So instead of showing photos, it like drew its own imagination of what this house looked like. And you're like, well, I'm not sure that was exactly what I wanted, but it's kind of like it's creatively trying to solve the problem. Like if you've never seen a model try to like solve a problem in one of these cases, it's fascinating. It's like, well, I can't do that. Should I try this? Well, I still can't do that. I'm going to pretend it, and like it really wants to solve that problem. I don't think you want to sort of prevent it from doing that, like hold it like entirely, because that is part of the magic of being more agentic. But you do want to sandbox it in the right way. So what we find a lot in the agentic systems that we build inside enterprises is, all right, the box that Claude is running in, what are its permissions? What's the minimum amount of permissions, and what's the sort of conduit between that and the outside world? So that you want autonomy, but you want autonomy in a sandbox with the right sort of abstractions around when it goes off, exactly, and when it goes off, and then what information flows in and out. And that's also a really good like point around adding observability. So it's autonomy within sandboxes with the right connectivity elsewhere.
And so talk to us about coding. You folks have actually really focused on that one and crushed it. Where does coding go from here? What does coding look like in the next year, in the next 2 years, next 3 years?
Yeah.
And by the way, talk about not just the fact that it's going to get to 100% code writing, but how does the software development lifecycle change? How do the roles change? What should the CIOs and companies be thinking about to adopt to this new model of coding?
Yeah, I love this topic. I feel like I could talk about it for an hour, so I'll try to be brief and pointed. I'll maybe give a vignette from what it's like right now inside Anthropic on our labs team, which is we are regularly producing 2,000 to 3,000 line pull requests with each other, especially on the labs team where we're moving extremely quickly.
Is Claude being written by Claude?
Claude is being written by Claude. Claude products and Claude code are being entirely written by Claude. When Dario, I think, was on stage a year-ish ago and was like, oh, by the end of the year, 90% of code is going to be written by Claude. People thought it was crazy, but we were already seeing that trajectory. Right now, for most products at Anthropic, it's effectively 100%. It's Claude writing, and then what we've done is created all the right scaffolds around it to like let us trust it. So the few things that how software development has changed. One is having Claude trained and sort of prompted to be a really good adversarial code reviewer has been fantastic. Like, I'll put up pull requests, and Claude will come back and say, here are the security vulnerabilities, but here's also how it could be refactored. Here's how it could be different. And sometimes this sounds, adversarial code review, I was talking to the person that had built it internally. I'm like, what did you do? And like, he showed me the prompt. It's actually not rocket science. It's just really prompting to be like a super tough grader. Like, what are all the different problems that you can do? What are the different automated checks? And enforcing some softer sort of requirements as well. So that's one of them that I think really matters. The second one is being willing to let Claude re-architect things. I was working on an iPhone prototype, and it just clearly had gotten to the point where the sort of initial architecture hit a wall where it was just having trouble parsing it. Asking Claude to step back, first write some verification, then go off and refactor it. We've talked about there's components at Anthropic. We're not an old company, we're only a few years old, but you can accumulate tech debt at a very fast pace, especially in the age of AI. Paying down that tech debt, that calculus has really changed for us too. So that's been another interesting aspect of it too. And then the third one is, and I felt this a little bit a year ago, and I really feel it now, is how much all the other processes become bottlenecks. So we had an outage of our sort of continuous integration system yesterday, and that would have been a mild annoyance because you maybe were producing one change set or pull request a day and you have to wait an hour. When you're producing, like no joke, a dozen at least per engineer on the team, it was just like I felt physically pained because it was like all this stuff is just like gumming up the works. It also makes recovery more challenging. And so that focus on developer tooling, on developer efficiency, on the developer infrastructure, that was already mildly important, is now sort of any blocks or outages or friction becomes a 10x sort of penalty on your team's productivity.
Is the scarcity now getting to be reviewing and auditing code rather than actually writing code?
It's reviewing, auditing, integrating, right? Because now you've also got the thing where you've got multiple engineers contributing to the same place as well. And then driving alignment, first on like what the product should be, which was in some ways always the hard part. Now it's really clearly seen as the hard part. But also, what is the sort of principles and architectures that you're going to want to build within your application? This is even more important in the enterprise. But aligning on that and what are those standards so that when you're reviewing or when Claude is reviewing the code, you're not just kind of duct taping things together, but you're evolving towards some consensus North Star around architecture, code principles, like problems that you're solving, that ends up becoming the bottleneck. And
if the internal philosophy of Anthropic is extreme use of experimentation, right, of AI, and you folks have very actively talked about that. When you think about advising the enterprise, does that kind of extreme use of experimentation something that you recommend to customers?
The place where I see it really showing up in the enterprise, or where I've seen success versus failure, is sort of, if you think about the opposite of that experimentation approach, it's all right, what is the sort of like single piecemeal piece that I feel safe adopting in this one thing, or I'm going to build one customized agent for this kind of low value process at my company where it's not really costing me that much. All of those have been doomed to failure because, one, the problem isn't ambitious enough so that you're really going to learn about the capabilities and what it's actually going to take. And then second, the second it hits a roadblock or it's not performing as well,
people give up.
People give up, and it's not. And so like finding instead, and we've worked with large banks, large insurance companies, where we found like some very critical business process where it should feel, I think, a bit scary that the idea that it's going to get agentified or with AI through it. But then partnering really closely to say, all right, what does success look like? What are the guardrails? How do we build this out? What's an aggressive timeline that we can build out? How do we push that even faster? Because you're going to want to stay on the frontier there, and then pushing that out. That's been, I think, the right pattern. Bringing some of that experimentation approach in there too, and then finding out. So maybe that's like how transform internal business processes. There's also how you empower your own product teams, because many of you are also sort of powering products with AI that you are then delivering to an end user as well, and finding out that right sort of level of centralization where ideally that central AI team is mostly facilitating access to models and some auditability and observability, and not being too opinionated on it. Are you building on the Cloud Agent SDK or something else? Is it LangChain or something else? Like you really, I think, want to push those decisions as much as possible into the product teams and only kind of treat as commonality, like really, I think it's a thin layer. It's access to models and observability.
And so in my mind, like this is one of the really important points, which is not prematurely coming to too many conclusions on the success or failure of something, but having staying power, conviction, and persistence to continually keep incrementally improving.
Yeah.
It almost becomes a superpower for a company. When the company can't stick with something for a long enough amount of time and creates too much trash, that actually, would you agree?
I think that that's right. And then there's also, the flexibility to say, all right, the shape of which we've, empowered the app with AI is not quite right yet. We actually need to rethink it. It's not the right form factor. Even for us within, take sort of spreadsheets, obviously essential tool for so much business. We've tried Claude reads spreadsheets and tries to write code to update it. That's one world. There's Claude, is seeing what's on the screen and trying to click on things within Excel. It actually turns out that's one of the hardest problems you can give computer vision is a spreadsheet. It's quite hard. And then there's the kind of current form, which is great. Let's actually build hooks into Excel itself, and that's been by far the most successful. That's like the third or fourth attempt that we've done, and it's I think not being too wedded to the exact implementation or incarnation of your product, but again. It's funny, it's like the things that were always true are only more true now, I think, right? Like number one, like your ability to write the software is not your differentiator, it's everything else, which is like the trust you've built, the brand you've built, your customer relationships, the data you have, like the integrations that you've negotiated over time. So I think that's true. But then at the second part, which is you shouldn't be too wedded with your existing form factor, you should be wedded to what problem you're deeply solving.
Okay, so you've had a few killer moments within Anthropic in the sense that, your API business is exponentially growing. But then you've got this whole notion of coding. What's next? Is productivity next? It seems like you folks feel like, hey, there's a better version of Office that might be coming out, or what's going on there?
The way we really think about it, and again, this maybe ties back to sort of my reason to do anything at all professionally, which is closing that gap. So we started seeing maybe 6 months ago, people were taking Claude Code, code in its name, and using it for very non-codey things. They were starting to use it for, sometimes it was orchestration in the enterprise, but sometimes it was solving personal problems, like creating a to-do list and managing it that way. And so a lot of what we're thinking about now is, all right, there's all these capabilities. At their extreme, you get like, open claw and like fully agentified everything. I don't think most people are like ready for that kind of level of giving AI sort of autonomy over their computer and infrastructure. But what is the next safe but still powerful evolution of bringing that capability to people? That's a lot of what we're thinking about right now. So we have Claude Cowork, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. Again, 100% built with Claude and basically built over 3 weeks with Claude. And then how do we continue to evolve that? And not to replace all the pieces of work people are already doing, but figuring out what the right ways of integrating and automating those pieces are.
You folks are doing a lot of work on this notion of mechanistic interpretability, where you can actually figure out why a model operates the way it does. How far along that journey are we in truly understanding why a model does what it does? And do you think we actually get to a tremendous amount of transparency on that, or are we pretty early in that cycle right now?
I think we're early but evolving. I mean, if I think about, it's almost like I've been a developer for 2 years. Like when I joined was the same month we did the Golden Gate Claude paper, which you remember we started being able to show sort of individual features within the model's brain and then being able to even manipulate them, to last year where we started seeing more around circuits, which is not just one concept, but also how the model might do something like mental math, which we don't think too much about how we do, but models are doing it too. They can do all the sorts of math even without a calculator, which doesn't necessarily follow from how they're trained. So that's been an evolution. I think now what we're getting even deeper on is like, how does the model behave in specific situations? Like, when does the model remain truthful? When does it deceive? And how should we think about that as well? When does it stay true to its instructions? And how does it think about sandboxing? It's much more sort of applied interpretability and how these things manifest in real world deployments. And we're in all, if you ever like want a weekend read, like all of our system cards for our models go really deep on the kind of experiments that we do in them. And we really push them so that we can then see how the models do. But then there's also emergent behavior once it's out there. So there's the what you do in the lab, and then there's also being really willing to sort of watch, engage, and then iterate based on what you see and deployed.
Now, by the way, in these models, like, there's ways that you can provide your preferences, and you can say, behave in this way, talk to me in this tone, make sure that you give me things at this level of aperture. But that tends to become a very power user-centric mode. And when you need to think about like getting 8 billion people in the world starting to use this on an hourly basis, how do you make sure that preferences get learned very instinctively much faster than what they're getting learned right now, so it doesn't look like overly, placating or overly polite when in fact you want to get to the substance faster, but understanding what the person's preference is without them explicitly stating it to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas in this space. One of them is like the observation before the model or the agent is even having to do work for you, right? So, as you can imagine, we use Slack really extensively, and we have all sorts of agents in Slack, and any one of those agents has probably seen me do more work, at least more online work, than any one of my coworkers, and can have built an observation around what kind of person is he, at least online, or how does he behave? All the documents that I've written. So if you can sort of take the fact that there's already this digital ephemera and use that to bootstrap, I think that's really powerful. And then the other place is, what is the right conversational way in which the agents can, or just models can engage in ways where they learn over time, right? I don't think anybody wants to fill out a big form around like, what are my preferences? But conversationally, I think we can start getting that, that feedback and build it back in. So a lot of what we've been experimenting, it doesn't sound like rocket science, but even things like, what are the kinds of UIs that Claude can create just in time to help it answer a question it has about you is very interesting, right? So if it's having you pick between 10 variety, maybe it's not a long list, maybe it's a little cloud, maybe it's done differently, maybe there's a way of segmenting it. So we're really trying to give Claude the ability to create the UI to elicit the preference so that it can learn.
Okay, last couple questions, if we could keep it tight, but if you can just tell us about this. What do you worry about the most? And then, more importantly, what are you excited about the most that you weren't last year? What's new that's gotten you really excited because of some discoveries and inventions that have happened?
Yeah. Let's see, I'm a worrier by nature, so I'll try to pick one particular worry. I think it's...
And by the way, pick one which is other than safety and security, because we've all talked about that quite a bit. So.
Yeah, I think like for me, maybe like how these things go badly, not from a safety and security perspective, but from just like a disappointment perspective, I think is also important. It's if... it's less the capabilities hitting a wall, which I don't think that they will, but it's more that our ability to like integrate these things into our work and our lives in a way that is rich and meaningful, like just hits really boring human process stuff, right? Oh, we couldn't get this permission. Like the difference of Claude enabled with the right MCPs and Claude just out of the box is radical, right? But somebody needs to approve those MCPs in your company, and it's a lot of the sort of block and tackle that somebody was like, actually, it's really funny. Somebody turned to me the other week at work and was like, my biggest fear is that the co-work that we use internally and the co-work that people use externally is very different because we've got all the permissions turned on and somebody else has like, it's been denied, and that what they're getting is like a really like what is this product even for? So that's
my life for the past 30 years in productivity, man.
Yeah, and so how do we ride that line carefully? That's probably one. And then excitement about that I wasn't excited about last year. I think, I spend, half of my brain on product management, half of my brain on engineering. I previously thought the engineering part was going to be, what Claude was going to be most helpful with in 2026. I'm beginning to see Claude be able to like be a more helpful sort of gatherer of user requirements, synthesizer. It's not necessarily like creative enough to come up with a brand new product, but a very helpful sort of product manager, at least intern right now, in a way that I think that was going to take longer.
What's the next killer app outside of coding and product development for tech that you folks will actually work on?
I think that there's a lot around, data is an overblown word, but like every enterprise has some interesting data stream that is probably completely undermined right now. And how do you actually get Claude, not necessarily to parse every data point, right? That's not a good use of LLMs.
Just get data preparedness to be at a high level.
And then create the kind of sort of ingestion and aggregation and insight gathering, whether that's cybersecurity, financial data, trading, other signals. We started working more in manufacturing as well. Like all of these have they boil down to, very complex, but like they've got interesting data streams that are completely underutilized right now.
You gonna come back?
Yeah, super fun. Yeah, super fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Mike
great
Krieger.
to see you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. That means great to see you.